Wisdom, that's the test. Which rival wisdom team is best? 52 teams of 8 antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries.
Team 24. Progress realistically. Quote definitions, biographical context, and synergy analysis to replace hate with motivational education to guidealife.com. Quote 24.1. Man is a reasoning rather than a reasonable animal. Alexander Hamilton, 1757 to 1804. Quote definition. Human beings are not naturally rational. They use the faculty of reason primarily to justify conclusions they have already reached through emotion, self-interest, and habit. The distinction is crucial. Reasoning is the process. Reasonableness is the outcome. And the two are far less connected than comfortable assumptions about human rationality suggest. Quote application. This is one of the most important observations for anyone trying to change minds rather than just supply arguments. If people reason their way to conclusions, better arguments would reliably produce better conclusions. But if people primarily reason their way to justifications for what they already feel, then changing minds requires engaging what is doing the feeling, which is exactly why the mission combines wisdom education with genuine human connection and story. Alexander Hamilton was born around 1757 in Charlestown, Nevis, in the British West Indies. Illegitimate, largely self-educated, and sufficiently brilliant to attract the patronage that brought him to New York for his education just before the Revolution began. He served as Washington's aide-de-camp, led a crucial assault at Yorktown, co-authored the Federalist Papers, served as the first Secretary of the Treasury, and designed the financial architecture of the United States before being killed in a duel with Aaron Burr in 1804-49. His observation about reasoning versus reasonableness came from decades of watching brilliant, educated people construct elaborate justifications for positions driven by ambition, fear, and self-interest, including, with characteristic honesty, watching himself do it. He had designed financial systems and argued constitutional cases with the same penetrating intelligence, and he knew that the reasoning was often in service of conclusion rather than the other way around. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Distinguish between the reasoning process and the reasonableness of the conclusion. The elaborateness of the argument tells you nothing about the validity of the result. 2. Apply this insight persuasion. Engage what is generating conclusion, not just a reasoning that is defending it, if genuine change is the goal. 3. Apply it to yourself as well. Examine what feelings, interests, and habits your own most confident reasoning is actually serving.
Quote 24.2. Wisdom begins in wonder. Socrates 470 to 399 BC. Quote definition. The starting point of all genuine wisdom, all genuine learning, all genuine understanding, is wonder, the open, receptive, genuinely curious encounter with what is not yet understood. The person who approaches the world with confident preconclusions has closed the door that wonder opens. Wisdom is not the destination of those who already know, but the journey of those who genuinely wonder. Quote application. Hatred is the absence of wonder. It replaces the open question, who is this person really? With the closed assertion, I already know what they are. The entire educational mission of ReplaceHate.org is an invitation back into wonder, the willingness to approach other human beings, other ideas, and other ways of living with genuine curiosity rather than preloaded conclusion. Wisdom begins exactly there. Socrates appears in Team 17 as well, where his principle of being as you wish to seem anchored the authenticity foundation. Here, at the beginning of Team 24, his deepest epistemological observation sets the frame. Born around 470 BC in Athens, Socrates spent his adult life wandering the agora and asking questions, not because he lacked knowledge, but because he understood that the genuine encounter with what one does not know was the only path to wisdom that actually worked. His famous Socratic method was organized wonder in practice, a sustained, disciplined refusal to accept confident assertion as a substitute for genuine inquiry. He died at 70, still asking questions, still genuinely wondering, and still demonstrating by his example that wisdom was available to anyone willing to begin where he always began, in honest, open wonder at what was not yet understood. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Cultivate wonder as a deliberate practice, approaching people, ideas, and situations with genuine open curiosity rather than preloaded conclusions. 2. Recognize that the closure of wonder, the confident "I already know," is the end of the wisdom journey rather than its evidence of completion. 3. Apply Socratic wonder specifically to those who seem most different. The most genuinely curious question about another person's actual experience is often the first step from prejudice to understanding.
Quote 24.3. Doubt, of whatever kind, can be ended by action alone. Thomas Carlyle, 1795 to 1881. Quote definition. The resolution to genuine doubt, whether about one's ability, one's direction, the rightness of a cause, or the likelihood of success, does not come from further deliberation, from gathering more information, or from waiting for certainty to arrive. It comes from acting. Action generates the evidence, the experience, and the clarifying feedback that deliberation alone cannot provide. Quote application. The doubt that delays the work of replacing hate, doubt about whether wisdom education works, whether change is possible, whether the effort is worth it, can only be answered by doing the work and observing what happens. Carlyle's principle is the prescription. When doubt is paralyzing, act anyway, and let the action provide the evidence that deliberation cannot. Thomas Carlyle was born in 1795 in Ecclefechan, Dumfriesshire, Scotland, the son of a stonemason and a deeply religious mother, and became one of the most influential and most difficult writers of the Victorian era. His Sartor Resartus, The French Revolution, the manuscript of which was accidentally burned by John Stuart Mill's housemaid and had to be completely rewritten, past and present, and on heroes and hero worship made him the dominant voice of Victorian social criticism for much of the mid-19th century. He was notoriously cranky, sometimes verging on reactionary in his later work, and his personal relationships were complicated by a difficult marriage to Jane Welsh Carlyle. But his observation about doubt and action reflects the authentic core of his philosophy, that the paralysis of excessive deliberation was one of the primary enemies of genuine achievement, and that the only cure was the direct engagement with reality that action provided. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Treat paralytic doubt as a signal to act rather than to deliberate further. The evidence that will resolve the doubt is generated by action, not by additional analysis. 2. Distinguish between productive caution that gathers necessary information and unproductive doubt that substitutes deliberation for the action it is avoiding. 3. Apply Carlyle's prescription to the mission. The doubt about whether wisdom education genuinely changes minds and communities can only be resolved by educating minds and communities and observing the results.
Quote 24.4. A chip on the shoulder is a sure sign of wood higher up. Brigham Young, 1801 to 1877. Quote definition. The chip on the shoulder, the defensive, combative posture of someone who feels perpetually slighted and perpetually prepared for offense, is a symptom, not the primary condition. The wood higher up is the real problem. The deeper insecurity, the unresolved grievance, the fundamental lack of confidence that generates the chip as its visible surface expression. Treat the chip without addressing the wood and the chip will return. Quote application. Hatred frequently presents as a chip on the shoulder. Defensive contempt for those perceived as threatening or superior. Understanding that this chip signals wood higher up is the key to the more patient, more compassionate approach that the mission requires. Not arguing with the chip but addressing the deeper insecurity, unresolved grievance or fundamental lack of dignity that is generating it. Chips dissolve when the wood is addressed. Brigham Young appears in Teams 20 and 21 as well, where his principles about freedom requiring virtue and right action anchored those frameworks. Here his most psychologically astute observation takes the stage. Born in 1801 in Whitingham, Vermont, Young led the Mormon pioneer migration to Utah, served as first governor of Utah Territory, and managed a vast community organization for decades, giving him extensive experience observing how defensive aggression operated in individuals and communities. His wood and chip formulation is the kind of practical insight that comes from watching the same pattern operate across thousands of people over decades. The combativeness is always downstream of something deeper, and the something deeper is almost always about dignity, security, and the unresolved fear of being found insufficient. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Look past the chip to the wood when encountering defensive aggression. Ask what deeper insecurity or unresolved grievance is generating the combative surface behavior. 2. Apply this understanding compassionately. The chip carrier is almost always suffering something real, even if the expression of that suffering is directed inappropriately. 3. Resist the temptation to argue with the chip directly. Address the wood instead by offering the genuine dignity, recognition, and understanding that the chip is signaling the lack of.
Quote 24.5. You are one of the forces of nature. Jules Michelet, 1798 to 1874. Quote definition. Every individual person possesses the same kind of fundamental reality and genuine power as any natural force. Not metaphorically, but actually. The human being is not a passive spectator of natural processes, but a genuine participant in them. Carry within themselves the same creative, transformative capacity that wind, water, and growth carry. To treat yourself as insignificant is to misunderstand your actual nature. Quote application. This is one of the most directly empowering observations in the collection for those who feel too small to make a difference in the work of replacing hate. Jules Michelet's declaration is not inspirational rhetoric, but a genuine claim about the nature of human agency. You are a force of nature, which means your actions are as real and as consequential as any other natural force. And like natural forces, they compound over time and leave permanent marks on what they touch. Jules Michelet was born in 1798 in Paris, the son of a printer who struggled economically throughout Michelet's childhood. He educated himself with fierce determination, became professor of history, and produced the most ambitious narrative history of France ever attempted, 17 volumes covering French history from ancient Gaul to the French Revolution, as well as a series of natural history books about the sea, the mountain, the bird, and the insect that were suffused with a reverence for natural forces and their relationship to human life. His declaration that each person is a force of nature came from his lifelong engagement with both human history and the natural world, and his conviction, deeply felt and consistently expressed, that the energy of individual human beings, applied with genuine commitment, was as real and as consequential as any other force operating in the world. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Claim the genuine agency that Michelet's observation describes, not as self-aggrandizement, but as accurate understanding of what human action actually is and does. 2. Apply the natural force metaphor. Forces of nature act consistently in their nature, compound over time, and shape everything they touch. Human forces operate the same way when consistently applied. 3. Refuse the self-diminishment that treats individual action as too small to matter. Each act of wisdom shared and kindness extended is a force of nature operating, which means it matters in the way that natural forces matter, cumulatively and permanently.
Quote 24.6. More than kisses, letters mingle souls. John Donne 1572 to 1631. Quote definition. Written communication. The letter, the composed message, the written expression of thought and feeling, creates a deeper and more lasting form of human connection than physical contact alone. The written word carries the thinking mind and the feeling heart in a form that persists, can be returned to, and mingles with the reader's own soul in a way that the fleeting physical moment cannot sustain. Quote application. In the digital era, Donne's observation about letters applies directly to every form of written wisdom communication. The workbook read carefully, the quote contemplated, the email that carries genuine thought, the content that a person returns to because it says something true about their actual experience. Written wisdom mingles with the reader's soul in the way Donne describes, more lastingly and more deeply than the passing encounter, because the written word persists and can be carried forward. John Donne was born in 1572 in London into a Catholic family in Protestant England, a background that shaped both his early experiences of marginalization and his eventual conversion to Anglicanism, which led to his ordination as a priest and ultimately his appointment as Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in 1621. His poetry, divided by tradition into the early erotic songs and sonnets and the later divine poems and holy sonnets, is among the most psychologically and intellectually intense in the English language, using the extended metaphorical comparisons called conceits to explore love, death, faith, and the nature of human connection with extraordinary originality. The observation about letters and kisses comes from his verse letter to Sir Henry Wotton, written during a period when Don maintained his most important friendships almost entirely through correspondence. And it captures his genuine conviction that the composed, considered, written expression of thought was a more complete form of human contact than physical proximity alone. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Take written communication seriously as a genuine form of soul-to-soul connection rather than a poor substitute for physical presence. 2. Invest genuine thought and care in written wisdom. The workbook, the letter, the carefully composed message, because the written word persists and mingles with the reader in ways the passing encounter cannot. 3. Apply Don's observation to the mission's written content. Every piece of carefully crafted wisdom education has the potential to mingle souls across time and distance in the way that Don describes, which is precisely why the writing deserves the full quality of thought it can receive.
Quote 24.7. Nothing can be done except little by little. Charles Baudelaire, 1821–1867. Quote definition. Every significant achievement, every genuine transformation, every lasting change, is accomplished through the accumulation of small, incremental steps rather than through dramatic leaps. The appearance of sudden transformation is almost always the visible surface of a long accumulation of invisible little by littles. Progress is not an event but a process, and the process is always incremental. Quote application. The mission of replacing hate with wisdom will not produce sudden cultural transformation. It will produce the accumulation of individual minds gradually shifted, individual communities slowly changed, individual habits of thought quietly revised. Baudelaire's principle is the realistic standard. Nothing can be done except little by little, and the mission that understands this is not discouraged by slow visible progress because it knows that the little by little accumulation is the actual mechanism of all genuine change. Charles Baudelaire was born in 1821 in Paris, lost his father at 6, was profoundly affected by his mother's remarriage to a military officer whose discipline he resented, and spent his adult life in chronic poverty, persistent ill health, and the extraordinary creative productivity that produced Les Fleurs du Mal, the collection of poems that transformed French poetry and scandalized French society when it was published in 1857, resulting in his prosecution for obscenity. He worked as an art critic, translated Edgar Allan Poe into French in translations that remain definitive, and produced a body of prose poems that invented a new literary form. His observation about the incremental nature of all genuine accomplishment came from hard personal experience of how slowly genuine creative work actually develops, and how the appearances of sudden achievement concealed the long accumulations that actually produce them. He lived the little by little, sometimes productively and sometimes destructively, until his death at 46. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Set realistic expectations for the pace of genuine change, both in personal development and in social transformation, based on the actual mechanism of incremental accumulation rather than the fantasy of sudden transformation. 2. Value and maintain the little by little contributions that seem too small to matter, because they are the only thing that actually produces the change that eventually looks significant. 3. Apply this principle as an antidote to the discouragement that slow visible progress generates. The little by little is happening even when the results are not yet visible, and stopping it is the only guaranteed path to the goal never being reached.
Quote 24.8. Let the consequences be what they will. I am determined to proceed. James Otis, 1725–1783. Quote definition. Genuine determination, the kind that produces actual change rather than stated intention, is independent of predicted outcomes. The person truly determined to proceed does not calibrate their commitment to the likelihood of success or the favorability of consequences. They proceed because the course of action is right, and they have determined to do it regardless of what follows. Quote application. The mission of replacing hate with wisdom proceeds in the face of genuine uncertainty about outcomes, genuine resistance from entrenched positions, and genuine possibility of failure. James Otis's declaration is the operating principle of everyone who carries the mission forward. Not, I will proceed if the consequences are favorable, but I am determined to proceed. Full stop. Consequences acknowledged and accepted rather than guaranteed. James Otis Jr. was born in 1725 in West Barnstable, Massachusetts, graduated from Harvard, and became one of the most consequential and most tragic figures of the pre-revolutionary period. In 1761, he argued before the Massachusetts Superior Court against the writs of assistance, general search warrants that allowed British customs officers to search any premises without cause. in a speech that John Adams later described as the moment when the child independence was born. He went on to coin the phrase, taxation without representation is tyranny, and became one of the most powerful voices for colonial rights. Then, in 1769, he was beaten over the head with a cane by a British customs official in a Boston coffeehouse, suffering a brain injury that produced increasingly erratic behavior and effectively ended his public career. He was killed by lightning in 1783. His declaration of determination regardless of consequences was made in the full knowledge of what resisting British authority could cost, and it was made anyway, which is precisely what made it consequential. This quote specifically encourages individuals to 1. Separate the determination to proceed from the calculation of consequences. Genuine commitment is not contingent on favorable outcomes, but on the rightness of the course. 2. Acknowledge consequences honestly rather than minimizing them, and proceed anyway. Otis's declaration is powerful precisely because it does not pretend the consequences don't exist. 3. Apply this principle to the moments when the mission encounters genuine resistance. Not, we will proceed if things improve, but we are determined to proceed, because the determination is what makes the proceeding real.
How they work together as a unified philosophy to replace hate with motivational education to guidealife.com. The Progress Realistically Framework. Understanding layer, reasoning versus reasonable and wonder as start, quotes 1, 2. Hamilton established the honest psychological foundation. Humans reason toward justifications more than they reason toward truth, making realistic progress dependent on engaging what drives conclusions, not just the arguments defending them. Socrates provide the antidote, wonder as the starting point of all genuine wisdom, ensuring that the realistic understanding of human psychology leads toward open curiosity rather than cynical manipulation. Together, the honest foundation of realistic progress. Hamilton's realism about how humans actually think prevents the naive assumption that better arguments alone produce better conclusions. Socrates' wonder provides the alternative, genuine open curiosity that bypasses the defensive reasoning Hamilton describes, because wonder has no conclusion to defend. Realistic about human psychology, committed to the wonder that transcends it. Action layer, doubt ended by doing and chip addressed at the root, quotes 3, 4. Carlyle, prescribe action as the only genuine resolution of doubt. Deliberation alone cannot end what only evidence from actual engagement can answer. Young, apply realistic psychology to the defensive aggression that the mission will encounter. The chip signals would higher up, and the would rather than the chip is what realistic engagement must address. Together, the action intelligence of realistic progress. Carlyle ends the doubt that delays action by demanding action as the only genuine resolution. Young ensures that the action taken is aimed at the actual problem, the deeper insecurity that generates the chip, rather than the surface expression that would deflect and return. Act to resolve doubt. Act at the root of the defensive reaction rather than its surface. Agency layer, natural force and soul-mingling connection, quotes 5, 6. Michelet, affirm the genuine power of individual human agency. You are a force of nature, providing the confidence that realistic progress requires without descending into either naive optimism or disempowering pessimism. Don, identify the mechanism by which that natural force most effectively transmits wisdom, written communication that mingles souls, making the letter, the workbook, and the carefully composed message the vehicles of genuine connection. Together, the power and the transmission of realistic progress. Michelet ensures that the realistic understanding of how hard genuine change is does not become the paralysis of feeling too small to matter. You are a force of nature, and forces of nature compound. Don provides a specific mechanism through which that force most effectively operates. Written wisdom that persists can be returned to and mingles souls across time and distance. Persistence layer, little by little and determined to proceed, quotes 7, 8. Baudelaire, set the realistic pace of genuine progress. Nothing can be done except little by little, preventing both the discouragement of unrealistic speed expectations and the abandonment of effort when cumulative results are not yet visible. Otis, close the framework with unconditional determination. Let the consequences be what they will. I am determined to proceed, providing the commitment that makes the little-by-little accumulation actually continue long enough to produce its cumulative result. Together, the pace and the persistence of realistic progress. Baudelaire sets the realistic expectation. Incremental, cumulative, invisible before it becomes visible. Otis provides a determination that makes the incremental process actually continue, not contingent on favorable consequences, but committed regardless. Little by little, determined to proceed, the complete prescription for progress that is both realistic about pace and unconditional about commitment.
Free easy extra advantage math, spelling and reading workbooks you can download for free at stop2think.com or buy at educationstopshate.com. Free easy math wisdom workbooks with octo repetition to grow math self-confidence. You'll get plenty of repetitive practice of age ranges and averages of our 52 teams of 8 quote authors. Free easy alpha cipher-coded puzzles teach letters, numbers, and phrases using antique wisdoms that encourage and educate. Can you decode this cipher quote of encouragement using either our learning to spell or just for fun instructions? And since time is money, practice reading faster with 52 teams of antique rival wisdoms that have passed the test of time to encourage, educate, and entertain generations for centuries. We offer printed versions and timed videos with background music. Sign up for free weekly emails of 52 teams of antique rival wisdom workbooks with easy math, spelling, and reading practice. And, if you'd like to get paid for sharing our wearable wisdoms, keep this in mind. Everyone I know wears a shirt, and most of us change them daily, so change your shirt and change the world. Social equalities are blatantly subliminal antique positive wisdoms repetitively shared without saying a word. This applies to all our wearable shareable wisdoms. Like pretty witty baby onesies and baby tees that you and others will see and read multiple times a day. The same is true with pretty witty kids, but they'll also share these wisdoms with anyone that can read at daycare or school. Youthful truths let your kids gain confidence sharing antique wisdoms with their friends. Imagine them sharing words of wisdom with classmates and teachers. I think, therefore I think tees I wear is a super easy way to share words of wisdom that have passed the test of time. Our social equalities help make us all wiser and kinder with blatantly subliminal messages promoting a more fair and equal opportunity society for all. And don't forget our giftwisdoms.com for birthdays and holidays that makes it easy to share the wisdom with clothing, coffee mugs, and magnets. So do the future a favor by encouraging, educating, and entertaining with words of wisdom that have passed the test of time to make us all wiser and kinder. With wearable wisdoms to fit babies, kids, and adults. You can clothe a whole family, city, or state. Join the 52 of 8 today.